The history of Thanksgiving. When and for what reason was first Thanksgiving celebrated in the United States? The turkey dinners invariably have the same question. You'll find the holiday's backstory here. After Christmas, Thanksgiving is the second most popular holiday in America. It shouldn't be a revelation that Thanksgiving is full with beloved customs, from sports events to filling towards the Macy's Day Parade. However, this idealized depiction of contemporary festivities glosses over a significant portion of Thanksgiving's actual history. Spend some time researching about the history of Thanksgiving before you ask Google, "When is Thanksgiving?" If you take the time to learn about the history of Thanksgiving and its culture, you'll get a greater respect for those who came before you and the rituals that bear their names. Take a look. Where it all began. The harvest banquet shared by the settlers of Plymouth Colony, after known as pilgrims, as well as the Wampanoag Confederacy during the autumn of 1621, is widely credited as the genesis of the modern American festival of Thanksgiving. The phrase "First Thanksgiving" was conceived by publisher Alexander Young in 1841 to relate particularly to the record of the 1621 occasion as provided by the Plymouth Colony's scribes William Bradford as well as Edward Winslon, although there is proof of previous Thanksgiving festivities in the American continent through the Spanish throughout the 16th century and during the era of Jamestown Colony of Virginia in 1610, having followed what is identified as the starving times of 1609. History of the Plymouth Colony and the first Thanksgiving. Thomas Weston, a maritime explorer, leased the Mayflower to something like a band of Puritan separatists, the Pilgrims, with Anglican immigrants, the English, so that they might build a prosperous colony in Virginia. Unfortunately, the Mayflower was diverted by the wind and ended up in New England rather than the more developed Jamestown, upon which they counted on for help. When the Mayflower finally came to dock on the shores of Cape Cod on 11th of November 1620, her 102 travellers realised they were completely alone, that wintertime had already started, that they were running low on provisions, and that it was too late to sow any farms. However, from December 1620 to March 1621, half of the travellers and staff perished from starvation and different illnesses, despite surviving on stolen maize from Native American stockpiles, tomb robbing where food had been left as sacrifice, and hunting trips. Native American Samoset saved these people in March 1621 once he courageously entered the colony, embraced them, spoke to them in English and welcomed them, along with introducing them to Tisquantum, who understood English. He also introduced them all to Chief Osamequin of the Wampanoag Confederacy. To ensure the safety of the pilgrims, Massasoit told Squanto to stay behind and instruct the group. With Squanto's guidance, the colonists reaped a successful harvest in the autumn of 1621 and learned where the greatest hunting areas and fishing waterways were located. The colonists had a harvest celebration, which has become known as the First Thanksgiving. Popular accounts of the event follow the framework established by historian George F. Willison in his 1945 work Saints and Strangers, which itself is inspired by Bradford and Winslow's previous records. Bradford and Winslow's Mort's Relation contains a thorough description of the first Thanksgiving, whereas Bradford's of Plymouth Plantation just makes passing mention to the occasion. The First Thanksgiving. Bradford's work has been edited to include the phrase "for which they thanked God" before or after the phrase "they set up a day of thanksgiving," although this appears to be an afterthought. Mort's Relation, the earliest account of the incident, does not mention the creation of a day of thanksgiving. Even while Bradford references turkeys that were presumably given during the event, no meal like the one offered by Willison occurs in the original texts, and even though cranberries certainly flourished in the adjacent marshes, nothing implies they were gathered. There weren't any tarts, pumpkin or anything else, because there were no stoves, butter or grain for crusts inside this hamlet. The most obvious distortion of the initial Thanksgiving myth is the notion that Wampanoag Native Americans were welcomed to the celebration, since this is implied in the aforementioned connection from Willison, but it is not supported by the original records. When John Carver, the town's first administrator, concluded a peace pact with Massasoit around March 1621, the two leaders agreed to help each other out in times of need. Bradford and Winslow described the colonists shooting their firearms right before Massasoit with his troops appear in Mort's Relation, suggesting that the arrival of Massasoit and his troops was a direct result of the bang of the flintlocks as required by the provisions of the contract. Stance of Native Americans. Bradford mentions a further harvest celebration occurring in 1623, but he does not mention any others. Many English people moved to North America after reading Mort's narrative and then another book by Winslow, Good News from New England. Around 20,000 English immigrants came between 1630 and 1636, a period now referred to as the Great Migration. When Carver and Massasoit made peace in 1621, it lasted until Massasoit's demise in 1661, but subsequent treaties among colonists with Native Americans also weren't fulfilled. Perhaps the Native Americans were forcibly removed from their homeland, or they voluntarily or involuntarily surrendered land to the colonists, after which they relocated farther inland. The Pequot War took place between 1636 to 1638, when members of the Pequot Nation fought against colonialism and the loss of their culture in response to the relentless devastation of native land and way of life brought about by European settlers in New England. Numerous Pequots were slain in the conflict or executed shortly thereafter, and those who survived were sold as slaves. Most Native Americans now see the Thanksgiving not as a time for celebration, but as a somber occasion, since they believe it to have been established by that of the colonists of both the Massachusetts Bay Company as opposed to the Plymouth Colony. New England colonials and subsequent immigration authors showed little curiosity in Native American civilization or in stories that contradicted their own. Thus they changed some parts of Bradford and Winslow's tale and omitted Native Americans' perspectives entirely. Numerous Native American indigenous peoples today still point to the colonists' declaration of numerous occasions of Thanksgiving prior to and following strikes on Native American villages, particularly all through King Philip's conflict, 1675 to 1678, as justification for commemorating Thanksgiving as a holiday of deep despair instead of festivities. The original colonists' children appear to have participated in the festival in different guises before the 19th century. Progression and the celebration of the present. It should be noted that the first national pronouncement of Thanksgiving in 1777 was not related to the 1621 incident and also was meant as a somber day of devotion and acclaim to God. Mort's relation and of Plymouth Plantation were not made accessible to the overall general populace until 1841 and 1856 respectively. Many Americans now enjoying Thanksgiving would be completely unfamiliar with this tradition. Unlike Sarah Josepha Hale's earlier efforts to have Thanksgiving acknowledged nationwide, President Lincoln did take sincerely her proposal because of the widespread trend of the Pilgrim storyline as provided by Bradford and Winslow and afterwards established by Longfellow and many others by the mid-19th century. Hale's efforts. Among the most widely read authors of her day, Hale also championed the eradication of slavery, the equal rights of women, the promotion of cats from the role of mere pest management to that of beloved pets, and the custom of decorating a tree as part of the Christmas holiday. Clearly, if the administrations she corresponded with had become more open to her assertions, she would have been far more successful sooner in her campaign for Thanksgiving. Nevertheless, this could only be achievable after the American people had adopted the tale of the Pilgrims and indeed the 1621 incident as a founding myth. Kennedy's pronouncement of Thanksgiving. Despite Lincoln's pronouncement making the fourth Thursday of November a public holiday, the celebration was not universally honored, especially in the southern regions. It wasn't until the presidency of John F. Kennedy in 1963, through much of an era of social turmoil and dispute comparable to Lincoln's, that the celebration received widespread backing from the federal authorities. Kennedy's pronouncement, like Lincoln's order, sought to foster national harmony and goodwill. The contemporary Thanksgiving holiday is sometimes traced back to an incident that took place in 1621. Nevertheless, Thanksgiving festivities in the United States have been promoted and commemorated for reasons that have nothing to do with the narratives in the original texts, including Kennedy's decree. Thank you for watching this video. Please don't forget to subscribe, comment, and turn on the notification bell.